In the small German town of Baden-Baden, nestled in the foothills of the Black Forest, the Meyer family seemed an example of the ideal. Thomas and Anna had been married for more than 20 years and were raising two children, 18-year-old Sophie and 14-year-old Max. Thomas, a successful engineer, was often away on business trips, and Anna took care of the house and children. Their life seemed harmonious until a terrible secret was revealed. Scene 1. Thomas, voiceover. I was far from thinking that our family's life would ever be ruined. But the truth always finds a way to come out. Thomas happens to see Anna's car in the parking lot outside the Alte Post Hotel. He decides to test his suspicions and tracks her to room 23, where she meets a young man named Felix. Thomas, whispering. She thinks I don't notice anything, but that's all about to change now. Thomas, voiceover. I was far from thinking that our family's life would ever be ruined, but the truth always finds a way to come out. The camera shows Thomas sitting in his BMW car parked in the shade of a large tree. He is watching the parking lot of the Alte Post Hotel. Thomas, to himself, I can't believe it. That's her car. The camera focuses on a blue Audi with license plates confirming that it is Anna's car. Thomas clutches the steering wheel, his face tense. He decides to get out of the car and walk towards the hotel. Thomas, to himself, I have to find out the truth. Thomas gets out of the car and heads towards the entrance of the hotel. The camera follows him, showing his determined expression. He cautiously enters the lobby, where a friendly receptionist smiles at him. Receptionist. Good evening, may I help you? Thomas, smiling, trying not to give away his anxiety. Good evening. I'm looking for my wife, Anna Meyer. She should be here. Receptionist. One moment, please. The receptionist checks the information on the computer, then nods. Receptionist. She is registered in room 23. Thomas. Thanks, and heads for the elevator. Thank you. The camera follows Thomas as he goes up to the second floor. He walks slowly down the hallway, his heart pounding and his breathing quickening. He approaches room 23 and freezes in front of the door, hearing muffled voices from inside. Thomas, voiceover. I must see it for myself. He listens to the voices, then makes up his mind and opens the door abruptly. The camera shows his shocked face, then switches to Anna sitting on the bed with a young man named Felix. They both look at Thomas in horror. Anna. Thomas? What are you doing here? Felix. Who is it, Anna? Anna tries to get out of bed quickly, but Thomas is already entering the room, his eyes full of anger and frustration. Thomas, screaming, How could you? How could you do this to me and to our children? Anna begins to cry, realizing that her secret is out. Anna, Thomas, I can explain everything. Thomas, bitterly, explain? You cheated on me. That's all I need to know. Thomas takes a step back, his eyes full of determination. He turns around and quickly exits the room, leaving Anna and Felix confused. Thomas, voiceover. I was willing to forgive her any mistake, but not this one. Now she's going to learn what real pain is. Thomas walks down the hallway, heading resolutely toward the elevator. The camera shows his back as the elevator doors close in front of him. As the elevator doors begin to close, Felix suddenly runs inside, hitting the open button sharply. The elevator doors slide open again, and Felix, full of rage, pounces on Thomas. Felix, you think you can just walk away like that? Felix pushes Thomas against the wall of the elevator, delivering a series of punches to his face and torso. Thomas tries to defend himself, but Felix is stronger and faster. Thomas, gasping, Get away from me! Thomas tries to punch Felix back, but gets another hard kick to the stomach and falls to the floor of the elevator. Felix leans over him as he continues to throw punches. Felix, you're nothing but a pathetic loser. You couldn't even hold on to your wife. The camera shows Thomas's face contorted with pain and anger. He gathers his last strength and suddenly grabs Felix's leg, yanking him down. Felix loses his balance and falls to the elevator floor next to Thomas. Thomas, to himself, am I really going to let him beat me up? Thomas, overcoming the pain, abruptly gets to his feet and delivers a powerful fist punch to Felix's face, causing him to fall backward. Felix tries to get up, but Thomas grabs him by the collar and pins him against the elevator wall. Thomas, in an ominous tone, you have no idea who you're messing with. The elevator doors open on the first floor. Thomas steps out, throwing Felix to the floor. Felix, breathing heavily, stares after Thomas, unable to get up. Felix, shouting after him, "This isn't over." Thomas walks out of the hotel, his face covered in blood and bruises, but determination burns in his eyes. Thomas returns home to clean up and begin his plan for revenge. The first thing he does is gather all the evidence of Anna's infidelity and prepare for a legal battle for child custody and divorce. Thomas sits down at his desk and processes the photos and videos he received from the private investigator. He calls his attorney and makes an appointment for the next day. Thomas, on the phone, I want to file for divorce and get full custody of the children. I have all the evidence of her cheating. The camera shows Thomas's face, focused and determined. He turns off his phone and turns to look at the family photos on the wall. His eyes fill with anger and pain. Thomas, voiceover. I will make sure they never forget that they betrayed me. The camera shows Thomas's office. On the desk are papers, photos, and videos. Thomas, with a broken face and abrasions, sits at the desk, holding a glass of whiskey in his hand. His gaze is fixed on a photograph of the family on the table. Thomas, voiceover. I never thought my life would turn into a nightmare, but this is my reality now, and I'm not going to stand by. He picks up the photograph, looks at the smiling faces of Anna and the children. Anger and pain are reflected in his eyes. Thomas, to himself, they deserve to know the truth. She destroyed everything we built. Thomas puts the photograph back on the table and picks up his laptop. He starts looking up the contacts of the best lawyers in Baden-Baden. The camera shows his laptop screen with several open tabs with law firms. Thomas, to himself, I'm not going to let her take the kids. I will do everything I can to win this battle. Thomas jots down a few contacts in his notebook. He then opens the folder with the evidence of Anna's infidelity. The camera focuses on photos of Anna with Felix and other men, and videos of their meetings at the hotel. Thomas, voiceover. This evidence will destroy her reputation and her career. She won't be able to get away with it. He places the folder on his desk and turns on an audio recording of a phone conversation in which Anna discusses her meetings with her lovers. Thomas listens, his face contorted with pain and rage. Anna, recording, you know Thomas doesn't suspect anything. He is too busy with his work. Lover, recording, that's fine. We can continue as before. Thomas turns off the tape, his fists clenching. He realizes this is his chance to expose her to everyone. Thomas, voiceover. She's been playing me like a puppet, but now it's her turn to feel the pain. He picks up his cell phone and dials the number of his friend Peter, who works for the police. Thomas. Hey Peter, I need your help. I have proof that my wife is cheating on me, and I want you to help me get it into the hands of the right people. Peter, on the phone. Thomas, this is serious. Are you sure you want to go down this path? Thomas, determined. Absolutely. She destroyed our family, and I'm not going to let her get away with it. Peter agrees to help, and Thomas makes an appointment for the next day. He hangs up the phone and goes back to his plan. Thomas, voiceover. This is just the beginning. I'll make sure she pays for her actions. He opens a notebook and begins to plan out the next steps in detail. A legal battle, publicizing evidence of the affair, exposing himself to friends and co-workers. The camera shows his focused face as he writes the plan. Thomas, to himself, I have to be ready for anything. She won't give up without a fight. Thomas, immersed in his thoughts and plans, happens to notice through the window a black car pulling up to the house. In it sit Felix, two bandits, and his wife Anna. They all get out of the car and head towards the house with a determined look. Thomas, to himself, "What the hell?" Thomas quickly gets up, picks up all the papers and evidence lying on the table, and puts them away in the cabinet. He hurries to the office door and peeks out into the hallway, trying to figure out what's going on. Anna, shouting, "Thomas, come out! We have to talk!" Thomas opens the cabinet door and steps out into the hallway. Anna and her companions are already entering the house without waiting for an invitation. Thomas, "What do you want?" Felix, smiling, "Oh, Thomas, we've come to talk about the future." Felix takes a step forward, but Thomas blocks his way. "Thomas, you don't belong here." Felix, "Get out before I call the police." Anna, with disdain, "Oh, Thomas, stop pretending. You know everything, and you know perfectly well that you don't belong here anymore." Anna makes a sign to the thugs, and they begin to move towards Thomas, clearly intending to use force. Thomas, heartily, "You can't just kick me out of my house. This is our home together." Thomas, laughing, "It was your home together. Now it's her home, and you're going to have to leave." Transition. Thomas, pulling himself together, calls his lawyer and arranges an urgent meeting. He decides not to waste time and immediately starts preparing for the legal fight for his rights. Thomas sits across from his lawyer, Richard Schultz, one of the best lawyers in town. They discuss a plan of action. Richard, listening intently, "Thomas, we have every reason to file a lawsuit, but you must realize that it will be a long and complicated process." Thomas, resolutely, "I'm ready for it, Richard. I will not back down." Richard nods, opening a folder of documents. Richard, "Good. We'll start by filing for divorce and claiming full custody of the children. We will also present all evidence of her adultery and the moral damage she has done to you and the children." Thomas nods, feeling that this is just the beginning of his fight for justice. Thomas, to himself, "I will get my life back, and they will pay for everything." The scene ends as Thomas and Richard continue to discuss the details of the case. Preparing for the upcoming legal battle, Thomas and Richard continue to discuss strategy. Richard, seriously, "Thomas, we will need to gather more evidence of her infidelity and moral damages. I also recommend hiring a private investigator to gather more information about her lovers and their encounters." Thomas, nodding, "Already working on that. I have a contact who can help. We should also prepare an application for a restraining order against Felix and his thugs." Richard, agreeing, "That's a great idea. It'll help protect you and the kids. I'll get on it right away." Richard makes notes in his notebook, then raises his head and looks at Thomas carefully. "Richard, are you prepared for the fact that this fight could drag on for months, if not years?" Thomas, confidently, "I have no other choice. I will not let her destroy our family." They continue to discuss the details of the plan, including calling witnesses, preparing evidence, and possible strategies in court. The camera shows Thomas signing several documents and receiving copies from Richard. Thomas visits his parents to discuss the situation. His parents, Helga and Carl, meet him with concerned faces. Helga, hugging Thomas, "We heard what happened. How are you holding up?" Thomas, sighing, "It's hard, Mom, but I can't give up. I have to fight for the children." They sit down at the table in the kitchen, where Helga serves tea and cake. Carl listens attentively to Thomas, who recounts the recent events. Carl, seriously, "You're doing the right thing, son, but be careful. Anna and her new friend seem to be up to anything." Thomas, nodding, "I know, Dad. That's why I've enlisted the support of Richard Schultz. He will help me in court." Helga takes Thomas's hand in hers, her eyes full of concern. Helga, "We'll always be on your side, Thomas. If necessary, we can help with the children. They can stay with us until you get everything sorted out." Thomas smiles, feeling the support of his parents. Thomas. Thank you, Mom, Dad. It means a lot to me. Thomas arrives at the office of the private investigator, Marcus Brown. They sit down at the desk and discuss the assignment. Marcus. Serious. Now, Thomas, what exactly do you want me to find? Thomas. I need further evidence of Anna's adultery and her connection to Felix. I also need to find out if she has other lovers. Marcus, nodding. Understood. I will begin immediately. I have several proven methods and techniques for this. Marcus gives Thomas some recommendations and promises to keep him informed. They agree on the next steps and sign the contract. Thomas and Richard are in the courtroom where the application for a temporary restraining order against Felix and his thugs is being heard. The judge listens to both sides and makes a decision. Judge, sternly, in light of the evidence and arguments presented, I grant Mr. Meyer's application and issue a temporary restraining order against Mr. Felix Schultz and his entourage. Thomas and Richard exchange glances and smile. This is their first victory in this difficult struggle. Thomas, to himself, this is only the beginning. I will keep fighting until I get my life back. The scene ends with Thomas walking out of the courthouse with a determined expression on his face, preparing for the next steps in his struggle. Thomas leaves his parents' house after sharing the news of the temporary restraining order with them. He heads to his car when a black car appears from around the corner. Two of Felix's thugs emerge from it. Buster 1, threateningly. Did you think you could get rid of us that easily, Meyer? Thomas tenses up, sensing danger approaching. One of the thugs pulls out a baton and the other comes closer. Buster 2, angrily. We're here to remind you who's in charge. Thug 1 strikes the first blow at Thomas, knocking him to the ground. Thomas tries to defend himself, but the thugs begin beating him mercilessly. Gromila 1 lands the first blow on Thomas, knocking him to the ground. Thomas tries to defend himself, but the thugs begin beating him mercilessly. Thomas, to himself, with difficulty. No, I can't let them win. In a moment of desperation, Thomas notices a gun on the belt of one of the thugs. He makes an effort to reach for the weapon, pulls it out, and fires. Shots, echoing down the street. Bang, bang! Gromila 1 falls to the ground, wounded. Gromila 2 is shocked at what is happening. Thomas rises to his feet, holding the gun in his hands. Gromila 2, startled. You're out of your mind! You're going to pay for this! Thomas fires again, hitting Thug 2 in the leg, who screams in pain and falls to the ground. Thomas breathes heavily, realizing what he just did. Thomas, to himself. I had no other choice. He quickly looks around, then rushes to his car and drives off, realizing that he needs to hide until the police arrive. Thomas hides in a rented house, trying to make sense of what has happened. He calls Richard to inform him of what has happened. Richard, on the phone, concerned. Thomas, do you realize this is serious? Now we not only have a legal battle, but a real threat to your life. Thomas, in a tired voice. I know, Richard, but I had no choice. They would have killed me. Richard advises Thomas to stay in hiding and not show his face in public until they have a plan of action. Thomas agrees and turns off his phone. Thomas, to himself, I have to keep going. I can't give up now. Thomas wakes up and begins to plan his next steps. He decides that he will not just sit in hiding and wait. Thomas, determined. I must find a way to strike at Felix and Anna. They have to pay for everything. He starts calling his old friends and acquaintances who can help him in this situation. Thomas plans a counterattack to ruin Felix and Anna's plans. Thomas, on phone. Hi, it's Thomas. I need your help. We have to end this once and for all. The scene ends with Thomas receiving support from his friends and beginning to develop a detailed plan for revenge. Thomas is awakened by the phone ringing. He answers it, seeing that it is Richard calling. Richard, on the phone, concerned. Thomas, I have some bad news for you. Thomas, straining. What's wrong, Richard? Richard sighs deeply. The judge who handled your case has been bribed. There will be no more trial. Anna and Felix are legally entitled to all your property. You have nothing else. Thomas sits in shock, trying to comprehend what he has heard. He feels his world crumbling even more. Thomas, sighing, it's just impossible. I've lost everything. Richard, sympathetically, I understand, Thomas, but we can't give up. There has to be another way. Thomas closes his eyes, trying to calm down and find the strength to keep fighting. Thomas, determined, we'll find a way. I won't let them take everything so easily. Richard, supportive, I'm with you, Thomas. Let's meet and discuss our next steps. Thomas disconnects the phone and sits down at his desk, immersed in his thoughts. He knows that he has nothing now and will have to start from scratch. Thomas and Richard meet with several old friends and allies to discuss the way forward. There is a tense atmosphere in the room. Thomas, addressing the crowd, thank you for coming. We have a lot of work to do. We have to get justice and get my property back. Friend 1, cheering. We're with you, Thomas. What are you planning? Thomas, determined. We will act cunningly and quickly. I have learned that Felix has weaknesses. We need to strike where he doesn't expect. The scene continues with a discussion of the details of the plan, each offering ideas and resources. Richard, showing a map. This is where we'll start. This will be our first point of impact. Friend 2, cheering. Great. I can get equipment and people. We'll be ready for action. Thomas feels the support of his friends and gains confidence. He realizes he is not alone in his struggle. Thomas, with determination. Thank you all. We're going to make it through this. I promise I'll get it all back. The next day, Tom learns from Richard that the judge has been bribed, and Anna and Felix are now legally entitled to all of Thomas's property. He felt like the ground was going from under his feet, but Thomas did not give up. He decided he had one opportunity left. Thomas spent a month planning his next strategy. He knew he had to proceed with caution and determination. Finally, day X came. He waited until nightfall, when the entire house was plunged into darkness. However, before he could begin his mission, he felt someone following him. Thomas looked around and saw a shadow by the window. It was Anna. He knew he had to act quickly.